Good evening and welcome. Wherever you are listening from right now, whether the room around you is already dark or the light is still on, but your body has begun to slow, you are very welcome here. Before we begin, take a small moment to let your shoulders drop and your breathing settle into its own rhythm. There is nothing you need to hold on to tonight and nothing you need to remember. This story is not asking for your attention in the usual way. It is only asking that you stay comfortably for a little while. Tonight, we are not walking through the streets of Paris. We are not following carriages, cafes, or the glow of gas lamps. Instead, we are stepping inside. Imagine a heavy wooden door, worn smooth by decades of hands, closing quietly but firmly behind you. When it does, the city disappears. What remains is a single Paris apartment in the 19th century, built of stone and habit, shaped by repetition rather than comfort. Inside these walls, people did not live in moments of excitement or spectacle. They lived in routines and small actions, repeated until they became invisible in rooms that taught the body how to endure. As this story unfolds, you do not need to track names or dates. You do not need to follow history as a sequence of events. Simply allow the rooms to appear one by one. Let the sounds soften. Let the night inside this apartment unfold at its own pace. And if you'd like, before the story carries you further, you can leave a quiet trace of yourself below by sharing where you are listening from and what time it is right now. For now, the door is closed, the city remains outside, and the life inside these walls is about to begin. The door closes without urgency. It does not slam, and it does not hesitate. It moves with the weight of something that has been closed thousands of times before, guided by habit rather than intention. The sound it makes is low and brief, more felt, then heard, a dull final note that settles into the air and does not echo. With that single motion, the apartment separates itself from the city outside. Whatever remains on the other side of the door street, noise movement light no longer belongs here. Inside, the space holds its breath. At first, there is a moment of disorientation, not because the apartment is unfamiliar, but because it refuses to reveal itself all at once. Light enters, cautiously filtered through narrow windows set deep into stone walls. It does not spread evenly. Instead, it pools in certain places and abandons others, leaving corners in a permanent state of half-shadow. The air feels still dense in a way that suggests it has been enclosed for a long time, shaped by the slow accumulation of daily life, rather than refreshed by the outside world. This is a Paris apartment in the 19th century, but nothing inside announces the date. There are no clocks demanding attention, no objects designed to impress. Time here is not measured in hours, but in repetition. In how often the same floorboard has been stepped on, in how many times the same door has been opened and closed, in how the space has learned the bodies that move through it, adjusting to their presence without ever fully yielding. The floor beneath your feet is solid, neither inviting nor hostile. Stone and wood dominate, chosen not for comfort, but for endurance. Even in warmer months, the surface holds on to a quiet coolness that never fully leaves. This is not the cold of winter, sharp and immediate, but a more patient cold one that lingers in the background of every movement. The apartment does not warm easily, and it does not forget the seasons quickly. It carries them forward, embedding their memory into its walls and floors. The entryway is narrow, serving its purpose without ceremony. There is no excess space here, no gesture of welcome. Coats are hung because they must be, shoes are placed where they will not obstruct the path forward, and any trace of the street is meant to end here. dirt, moisture, noise, these belong outside. The apartment insists on a boundary, even if it cannot fully enforce it. Over time, this insistence becomes part of the daily rhythm. Enter, close the door, pause, adjust. Only then move further inside. A corridor stretches ahead, longer than seems necessary, its proportions dictated by the structure of the building, rather than the comfort of its inhabitants. The walls are close enough to create a sense of passage, rather than space-guiding movement in a single direction. This corridor is not a place to linger. It exists to connect, not to accommodate. And yet, it is here that many small moments accumulate passing glances, brief pauses, the quiet negotiations of shared living. Doors open off this corridor, each one marking a transition into a different kind of enclosure. The first room, often facing the street, is larger than the others, its ceiling rising higher than the body requires. This height is not generous. It is deliberate. Air rises here, taking warmth with it, leaving the lower part of the room perpetually cooler. In winter, this means cold settles where people sit. In summer, it offers a brief illusion of relief. The room does not choose sides. It enforces the same conditions regardless of season. This room is arranged with care, though not necessarily comfort. Furniture is placed in ways that suggest order, not relaxation. Chairs face one another as if anticipating conversation, though much of the time they remain empty. A table holds objects whose primary function is symbolic books that may or may not be read, decorative items that signal stability and taste. This is the room meant to be seen, the one that presents the household to the outside world, even though the outside world is rarely allowed in. Yet even here the apartment resists excess. Sound does not travel freely. The walls absorb voices unevenly, softening some tones while amplifying others in unexpected ways. A conversation held here feels contained, wrapped in stone, and wood never quite escaping the room itself. Light, too, remains controlled. Curtains are drawn and adjusted throughout the day, not for aesthetics, but to manage glare, heat, and privacy. The room responds constantly to the time of day, though it never fully aligns itself with it. Moving further inside, the atmosphere changes subtly. The air feels heavier, less influenced by whatever light or movement exists beyond the windows. A bedroom waits here, quieter, darker, its purpose defined entirely by necessity. Sleep happens in this room not because it is inviting, but because it must happen somewhere. The bed is substantial, built for longevity rather than softness. Its frame does not creak easily. It is meant to hold weight year after year without complaint. Bedding is layered with intention. Blankets are chosen not for texture, but for insulation. They are folded and unfolded in the same order each night, a routine so familiar that it requires little thought. The bed becomes a site of careful preparation rather than spontaneous rest. At night, the room never fully darkens. Light seeps in around the edges of the window, covering enough to maintain a constant awareness of space. Shadows remain visible, shifting slightly as the night progresses, reminding the sleeper that the world does not disappear simply because their eyes are closed. Somewhere near this room, perhaps, at the end of the corridor, or tucked into a less prominent corner, there is a space dedicated to work. A kitchen, though the term suggests a separation between labor and life that does not truly exist here. This room is functional to the point of severity. Heat gathers quickly, smoke lingers, and smells settle into the walls long after their source has been removed. The surfaces here show signs of use, darkened patches, worn edges, subtle discolorations that record effort over time. This is not a room that rests. Even when empty, it seems prepared for the next task, as though anticipating the return of movement. The air here carries a different density, shaped by repeated cycles of heat and cooling. Objects are arranged for efficiency, not beauty. Everything has its place, because disorder would make the work harder, and the work is already demanding enough. Throughout the apartment, windows act as controlled points of contact with the outside world. They do not open easily, and when they do, they offer limited access. The street appears framed distant, its sounds arriving softened and indistinct. The city becomes a background presence, reminding the inhabitants that life continues beyond these walls, even if it rarely intrudes directly. This separation is not accidental. It is a form of containment that allows the apartment to maintain its own internal rhythm, largely unaffected by the fluctuations of the street below. Living in this space requires adjustment. Bodies learn where to stand to avoid drafts, where to sit to feel slightly warmer, how to move quietly enough not to disturb others who share the building. The apartment teaches these lessons slowly through repetition rather than instruction. Over time, these adaptations become unconscious. People no longer think about why they choose certain paths or positions. They simply follow them, guided by the memory embedded in the space itself. At night, when activity diminishes, the apartment reveals another layer of its character. Sounds from neighboring rooms and neighboring lives travel through walls and floors, arriving softened but unmistakable. A cough, a shifting body, the faint creak of a staircase, used by someone else moving through their own routines. These sounds are not interruptions. They are part of the environment, as expected as the weight of the air or the coolness of the floor. In these moments, the apartment feels less like an isolated dwelling and more like a single chamber within a larger organism. Many lives are contained within the same structure, separated by walls, but connected by shared conditions. No one exists entirely alone here. Even in silence, the presence of others is implied, carried through sound and absence alike. The apartment does not offer escape from the demands of daily life. It absorbs them. Every routine, every compromise, every small endurance becomes part of the space over time. The walls do not judge. They do not adapt to individual needs. They simply remain steady and unchanging, requiring the people within them to adjust instead. And yet there is a kind of stability in this arrangement. The apartment does not surprise its inhabitants. Its limitations are known. Its responses are predictable. In a world where much is uncertain, this predictability carries value. The space becomes a constant something to measure oneself against, something that defines the boundaries of possibility. As the night deepens, movement within the apartment slows. Lights are lowered carefully to conserve fuel and reduce risk. The final adjustments are made, doors secured, objects return to their places. The same sequence unfolds each evening, rarely questioned. When the last light is extinguished, the apartment does not vanish. It remains present, its outlines still perceptible in the darkness, holding its inhabitants in a familiar, unyielding embrace. This is where life pauses, not because it is finished, but because it must gather itself for the repetition to come. Behind the closed door, the city continues without concern. Inside the apartment waits unchanged, ready to resume its quiet negotiations with the bodies that depend on it. And in this stillness, with the world reduced to stone air and habit, the night settles fully into place. No room in the apartment is accidental. Even the spaces that appear quiet, empty, or rarely used are shaped by intention, by habit, and by an unspoken understanding of who belongs where. The apartment may seem still, but it is never neutral. Every room carries expectations. Every threshold marks a shift, not just in space, but in behavior. The corridor that runs through the apartment is the first lesson in this quiet order. It is narrow, longer than comfort requires, and it offers no reason to stop. Its purpose is movement, not rest, and everything about its design reinforces this expectation. The walls stand close enough that the body instinctively straightens as it passes through shoulders, drawing inward without conscious effort. Light here is always limited, arriving indirectly from rooms at either end, never lingering long enough to soften the space. The floor bears the marks of countless crossings, its surface worn smooth along a central path, where footsteps have followed the same line for years. Bodies pass through the corridor, quickly guided forward without invitation to linger. Even when no one else is present, there is a sense that stopping would be inappropriate, as though the space itself were impatient. Over time, this feeling becomes instinctive. The corridor does not need to hurry anyone along. It simply refuses to reward stillness. No chair is placed here. No object asks for attention. The air remains neutral, unchanging, offering neither warmth nor comfort. It is a place designed to be passed through and nothing more. As days turn into months and months into years, the corridor becomes invisible to those who use it daily. It disappears from memory almost entirely, not because it lacks importance, but because it performs its function too well. It is remembered not as a place, but as a transition, a sequence of steps taken without thought, a habitual passage between moments that feel more significant. People recall where they were going or where they had come from, but rarely the space in between. The corridor absorbs this forgetting, quietly continuing to exist without acknowledgement. Yet it is precisely this unnoticed presence that gives the corridor its power. It quietly governs the flow of life within the apartment, deciding which rooms are reached easily and which feel slightly removed, almost distant. Rooms closer to the entrance are encountered more often, woven into daily routines with little effort. Those further along the corridor require intention, an extra set of steps that subtly discourages unnecessary visits. Over time, this distance shapes behavior. Certain spaces become central simply because they are convenient, while others recede into the background, visited only when needed. The corridor never announces these distinctions, but it enforces them nonetheless, guiding movement and attention with a firmness so subtle it is rarely noticed, yet almost impossible to resist. The room closest to the street is almost always the most presentable one. It receives what little light the apartment allows, filtered through tall windows that frame the outside world without fully admitting it. This room is designed to be seen. Its proportions are deliberate, its ceiling higher than necessary, its walls more carefully finished. Even when empty, it holds itself differently, as though waiting. When furnished, the furniture is arranged with awareness of sightlines and posture. Chairs are placed to face one another. Tables occupy central positions. Nothing here suggests collapse or informality. In this room, the body learns restraint. One sits upright. One speaks with measured volume. Movements are smaller, controlled, as though the room itself were observing. This is not necessarily because guests are present, but because the room has been shaped for their potential arrival. Even when no one else is there, the possibility remains. The room remembers its role and asks those within it to remember it too. Further inside, the apartment begins to loosen its grip, but only slightly. Rooms shrink, ceilings lower, light diminishes. These spaces are not meant for display. They are meant for use. A bedroom, for example, offers no illusion of grandeur. Its purpose is singular and unavoidable. Sleep must occur here whether the conditions are ideal or not. The bed dominates the room not as an object of comfort, but as a tool. It occupies space because it must. Everything else arranges itself around it. The bedroom teaches the body submission. It asks for stillness. It asks for acceptance of darkness, of shared air, of sounds that cannot be silenced. At night, the room fills with the faint noises of the building. Distant steps, a door closing somewhere above, the subtle shift of wood responding to temperature. These sounds are not intrusions. They are reminders that privacy is partial, negotiated, rather than guaranteed. The room does not isolate. It shelters, but only within limits. The kitchen exists under different rules entirely. It is not a place where one rests or reflects. It is a place where effort is visible. Heat gathers here, quickly drawn to the ceiling and trapped along the walls. Smoke clings even after windows are opened. Smells settle into surfaces, layering themselves day after day until they become part of the room's identity. This space carries the marks of repeated use more clearly than any other. Discoloration wear and subtle damage accumulate quietly without repair unless absolutely necessary. Here the body bends and reaches. Hands work continuously. Movements are repetitive, efficient, learned through necessity rather than instruction. The kitchen does not ask for elegance. It demands function. Objects are placed where they can be reached without thought, because thinking costs energy, and energy is always limited. The room shapes behavior through constraint, forcing a rhythm that becomes automatic over time. There are other spaces too smaller and less defined. Corners that serve as storage. Areas near windows where light briefly lingers during certain hours of the day. These spaces are not assigned formal names, but they are understood. Everyone who lives in the apartment knows what they are for. A chair placed near the window becomes the place where one mends clothing or reads by natural light. A small table near the wall becomes a surface for tasks that cannot be completed elsewhere. These informal rooms exist without walls, created through repeated use rather than architectural design. Even the absence of rooms carries meaning. There is no space dedicated to solitude. Privacy must be borrowed, created temporarily by silence or by timing. One learns to be alone by being still while others move, or by moving when others are still. The apartment enforces awareness of others simply by how it is arranged. No action occurs without consequence. Every movement is felt somewhere else, even if only faintly. The hierarchy of rooms is reinforced daily through habit. The most presentable spaces are kept in order longer. Dust is tolerated there less easily. Objects are returned to their places more carefully. In less visible rooms, disorder accumulates more freely, though never without limit. Cleanliness here is not evenly distributed. It follows visibility. What might be seen is managed more strictly than what remains hidden. This imbalance is not morale. It is practical. Effort is finite, and the apartment requires constant maintenance. Choices must be made about where that effort is spent. Over time, these choices become ingrained, no longer experienced as decisions. The apartment trains its inhabitants to prioritize certain spaces over others, shaping their sense of what matters without ever stating it directly. The relationship between rooms is as important as the rooms themselves. Doors are kept open or closed according to habit. Some remain shut except when needed. Others are rarely closed at all. These patterns establish invisible boundaries. A closed door signals exclusion, privacy, or rest. An open door suggests availability, work, or shared presence. The apartment speaks through these thresholds, communicating rules that are rarely questioned. Light reinforces these distinctions. Rooms closer to windows are used differently depending on the time of day. Activities migrate as the sun moves, following narrow paths of illumination that shift slowly across floors and walls. The apartment teaches patience through this process. Tasks that require light must wait for it. When it fades, those tasks end whether finished or not. The body adapts, learning to align itself with these limitations. Sound behaves differently in each room as well. In larger spaces, voices soften and spread. In smaller ones, they press closer, more immediate. A whisper in one room might carry farther than a raised voice in another. Over time, inhabitants learn where to speak and where to remain silent. The apartment does not enforce silence uniformly, it allocates it. These differences shape relationships. Conversations occur in certain rooms, avoided in others. Conflicts are contained or displaced based on where they are allowed to exist. Some spaces absorb tension better than others, not because they resolve it, but because they hide it more effectively. The apartment becomes a mediator, directing emotional energy along paths it has already established. Even rest is unevenly distributed. The body does not relax the same way in every room. In some spaces, it remains alert, posture, upright, senses engaged. In others, it surrenders slightly, allowing fatigue to show. These distinctions are learned early and reinforced daily. Over time, the body no longer questions them. It responds instinctively, adjusting itself to the expectations of the room it occupies. For those who share the apartment, these rules are rarely spoken aloud. They are transmitted through observation, correction, and repetition. A misplaced object is returned to its proper location. A voice raised in the wrong room is gently lowered. A presence lingering where it does not belong is subtly redirected. The apartment does not tolerate confusion for long. It insists on clarity through routine. What appears from the outside to be a single dwelling is in fact a network of carefully balanced environments. Each room plays a role, and each role carries weight. The apartment functions because these roles are maintained not through enforcement, but through habit. Disruption is possible, but it is uncomfortable. The space resists it quietly, encouraging a return to familiar patterns. At night, when movement slows and the distinctions between rooms blur slightly in the darkness, these roles do not disappear. They soften, but they remain. The living space does not transform into a single, unified shelter. It remains segmented, each room, holding on to its purpose even as activity diminishes. Sleep spreads unevenly, settling more deeply in some spaces than others. In this way, the apartment teaches its inhabitants how to live without ever offering instruction. It shapes behavior through boundaries, through repetition, through the quiet authority of walls and thresholds. The rooms do not merely contain life. They organize it, distribute it, and define its limits. And as the night continues, these invisible structures hold steady, guiding every breath, every pause, every small movement within the closed world of the apartment. Cold is the first thing the apartment teaches, and it teaches it slowly. Not as a shock, not as an event, but as a presence that never fully leaves. Even when the air outside is mild, even when the sun finds its way briefly through the windows, the cold remains embedded in the structure itself. It lives in the stone walls, in the floors that never quite warm, in the high ceilings that allow heat to rise and disappear before it can settle where the body needs it most. The apartment does not grow cold only in winter. Winter simply makes the truth impossible to ignore. During colder months, the chill deepens, becoming more assertive. but it is always there, waiting beneath the surface. The inhabitants learn this early. They learn it through touch, through the way bare skin reacts to surfaces, through the instinctive pause before sitting or lying down. The apartment trains the body to expect resistance, to understand that warmth is not a given, but something that must be earned, maintained, protected. Heat here is labor. It begins with fuel, coal, wood, whatever can be afforded and carried inside. This fuel does not arrive effortlessly. It must be brought in from outside, often in small quantities, balanced carefully against cost and necessity. Each piece represents weight, effort, and planning. Too little, and the cold asserts itself immediately. Too much, and resources are wasted. The apartment does not forgive excess or shortage easily. It responds to imbalance with discomfort. The fireplace where one exists is not the heart of the home in the romantic sense. It is a tool demanding attention. It must be fed, monitored, cleaned. Ash accumulates, quickly spreading fine dust that settles onto nearby surfaces and into the air itself. Smoke does not always behave as expected. It can linger, escape imperfectly sealed flues, or drift back into the room, irritating eyes and throats. The promise of warmth is never unconditional. It comes paired with inconvenience and risk accepted as part of the arrangement. Even when the fire burns steadily, its reach is limited. Heat radiates outward unevenly, leaving pockets of warmth surrounded by larger zones of cold. The body learns where to stand, where to sit, how close is too close. Chairs migrate subtly over time, nudged closer to the source, then pulled back again when the heat grows uncomfortable. This constant adjustment becomes second nature. The apartment demands attentiveness, rewarding those who learn its patterns with small, temporary relief. At night, the cold asserts itself more strongly. When the fire is allowed to die down, when movement slows and the body becomes still, the temperature drops noticeably. Blankets are layered not for luxury, but for survival. Their weight is reassuring, pressing down gently, trapping whatever warmth the body can generate on its own. Even so, sleep is often shallow, interrupted by the need to shift position, to pull fabric tighter, to respond to the creeping chill that finds its way in through seams and cracks. The bed itself offers little insulation from below. Mattresses are firm, constructed from materials that prioritize durability over comfort. Cold travels upward through the frame, reminding the sleeper that the floor beneath remains unchanged. The body learns to curl slightly, conserving heat, minimizing exposure. Over time, these positions become habitual, adopted without thought, even in warmer seasons. The memory of cold persists long after its immediate presence fades. Clothing plays an essential role in this quiet negotiation. Garments are chosen not only for appearance, but for layering potential. Multiple thin layers are favored over a single heavy one, allowing adjustment throughout the day as temperatures shift. Coats are worn indoors, shawls draped over shoulders, scarves kept close at hand. There is no sharp distinction between inside and outside attire. The apartment does not provide enough warmth to justify such separation. Instead, the boundary blurs, and the body carries its protection with it. Movement becomes a source of heat as well. Tasks are performed not only because they are necessary, but because they generate warmth. Sweeping, carrying water, preparing food, these activities serve a dual purpose. They sustain life and temporarily stave off the cold. Stillness, by contrast, invites discomfort. The apartment discourages prolonged inactivity, not through instruction, but through consequence. To remain motionless is to feel the chill settle deeper into the body. The cold also shapes the rhythm of the day. Mornings are particularly difficult. After a night of cooling, the apartment feels heavier, less forgiving. Rising from bed requires resolve. The first steps across the floor are taken carefully, toes, stiff muscles, reluctant. Breath is visible on the coldest mornings, a reminder that the interior offers little refuge from the season. It takes time for warmth to return, and even then, it is partial. Windows play a complicated role in this dynamic. They admit light, but they also invite cold. Glass is imperfect, frames leak air, and even when shut tightly, drafts find their way through. Curtains are used strategically drawn closed, not only at night, but during the day when the temperature drops. These fabrics serve as barriers modest but necessary, softening the exchange between inside and out. The apartment becomes a layered environment, each barrier adding a small degree of protection. The cold affects more than comfort. It influences mood, patience, and perception. Prolonged exposure dulls sensation, slows movement, and encourages quiet. Conversations shorten. Gestures become economical. The body conserves energy wherever possible. In this way, the apartment does not merely house its inhabitants, it shapes their demeanor. The chill encourages restraint, discourages excess, and fosters a kind of inward focus that defines life within these walls. For those who share the space, the cold becomes a common condition, rarely discussed, but always understood. Complaints serve little purpose. Everyone feels it. Everyone adapts. There is a quiet solidarity in this shared experience, an unspoken agreement to endure rather than protest. The apartment enforces equality through discomfort, reminding all who live within it that warmth is temporary and never guaranteed. Even objects seem to respond to the temperature, as though the cold were a force that reaches into every material and asks it to speak in its own way. Wood contracts and expands with slow, deliberate movements, producing subtle sounds that punctuate the quiet, soft ticks. Faint groans, the occasional long creak that travels through the floor or along a wall. These sounds are not signs of damage or danger. They are simply the building adjusting itself, reminding its inhabitants that the structure is alive to temperature in ways the human body cannot fully control. Over time, these noises become familiar markers of change, signals that the night has grown colder or that the fire has finally lost its strength. Metal reacts more immediately. Door handles, cookware, and fixtures draw warmth away on contact their surfaces, feeling almost sharp to the touch. The sensation is brief but unmistakable, a quick reminder that heat does not belong to the body alone. Each time metal is grasped, the exchange is felt small but cumulative, encouraging efficiency and discouraging unnecessary contact. People learn to handle such objects quickly, to minimize exposure, to treat them with a quiet respect, born of experience rather than caution. Water responds in its own way, becoming heavy and resistant as the temperature drops. Stored in ceramic jugs or simple containers, it grows icy, reluctant to move. Washing becomes a calculated effort, postponed when possible, completed swiftly when necessary. Before it can be used, water must often be warmed, a process that consumes fuel and time. This extra step turns even the simplest task into a small negotiation with the environment. Nothing involving water is ever effortless. Its temperature shapes decisions, delaying or hastening actions according to how much discomfort can be tolerated. Fabrics absorb the cold too, holding it close long after the air begins to warm. Clothing left draped over chairs feels stiff in the morning, unwelcoming, until body heat gradually softens it. Blankets, though essential, take time to offer comfort. When first drawn close, they feel cool, requiring patience before they fulfill their purpose. The body learns to anticipate this delay, to wait quietly rather than expect immediate relief. Even air behaves differently under the influence of cold. It grows denser, heavier, carrying smells and sounds more efficiently. Breath feels thicker, more present, especially in the early hours before the apartment has stirred. Each inhale carries a subtle reminder of the temperature, reinforcing the sense that nothing here is neutral or inert. The cold permeates everything, binding the space together through shared resistance, uniting walls, objects, and bodies in the same slow negotiation. Within this environment, nothing escapes untouched, and everything participates willingly or not in the quiet discipline imposed by the temperature. As seasons change, the intensity fluctuates, but the underlying condition remains. Summer offers brief relief, yet even then the stone holds on to its coolness, resisting the heat outside. This persistence reinforces the apartment's authority. It does not adapt quickly. It does not respond to immediate conditions. It maintains its own internal climate, one that demands respect and accommodation. Over years, this constant negotiation leaves its mark on the body. Posture adjusts. Muscles strengthen in response to repeated effort. Sensitivity to temperature increases. What once felt unbearably cold becomes tolerable, even expected. The inhabitants learn to read the apartment's signals, anticipating shifts and preparing accordingly. This knowledge is not written down or taught formally. It is acquired through lived experience, passed quietly from one day to the next. At night, as the apartment settles and the cold resumes its quiet dominance, there is a sense of familiarity in the discomfort. It is not welcome, but it is known. The body recognizes it, adjusts to it, and eventually yields to sleep despite it. In this way, the cold becomes part of the rhythm of rest itself, shaping dreams as much as waking hours. The apartment does not offer warmth freely. It allows it only in fragments, in moments, carved out through effort and attention. And through this constraint, it teaches endurance. Not the dramatic endurance of hardship overcome, but the steady, unremarkable endurance of daily life. The kind that leaves no record except in the habits of those who survive it. Within these walls, cold is not an obstacle to be defeated. It is a condition to be lived with, accepted, and quietly woven into the fabric of existence. Water never arrives unnoticed. In this apartment, it does not flow freely or wait patiently behind a handle. It must be invited in, carried measured, and used with intention. The presence of water is always temporary, and its absence is always assumed. From the moment the day begins, the inhabitants are aware of how much water they have, how much they will need, and how much effort it will take to secure more. The containers that hold it are never far from attention. Ceramic jugs, metal pails, basins placed carefully where they will not be knocked over. Each one carries weight, even when empty, a quiet reminder of what it is meant to contain. Their shapes are familiar, their surfaces worn smooth by repeated handling edges, softened by time and use. They are arranged with intention, never left in the middle of a passage, never placed where a careless turn of the body might send them tipping. Even at rest, they demand awareness, occupying mental space as much as physical. When filled, that weight becomes a physical fact that shapes movement. The body adjusts instinctively, shoulders setting, grip tightening posture, correcting itself before the first step is taken. Lifting water requires preparation, a brief pause to judge balance and readiness. Carrying it demands a measured pace, each step placed with care, the rhythm slower than usual, the path chosen in advance to avoid obstacles. Corners are taken wide. Thresholds are crossed deliberately. The apartment itself seems to narrow in these moments, as though reminding the carrier of what is at stake. Every step must be deliberate, because a spill is not merely an inconvenience. It is not something that can be laughed away or quickly forgotten. A spill represents wasted effort, the time spent fetching the water, the strain of carrying it inside. It is wasted time, the delay it introduces into every task that depends on it. And it is wasted possibility, the quiet knowledge that this water might have served another purpose, another need later in the day. The loss is felt immediately, not just in what has gone, but in what will now have to be done again. The apartment does not forgive carelessness with water. It offers no shortcuts, no easy replacements. A wet floor must be dried at once to prevent cold from settling in. Cloths are fetched, wrung out, used until they are heavy with moisture themselves. The air grows damp briefly, carrying the chill deeper into the space. The consequences of a single misstep ripple outward, touching more than the moment itself. Over time, this reality trains the body into caution. Movements become economical, attention sharpens, and water is treated not as a background resource, but as something fragile, earned, and easily lost. Fetching it is a task that belongs to the rhythm of the day. It happens early before other work begins, when the body is still stiff from sleep and the cold has not yet retreated. The journey outward down staircases, through hallways, into shared spaces, marks a temporary exit from the closed world of the apartment. But the goal is not exploration, it is return. Water is brought in as quickly and efficiently as possible, contained and controlled its value, understood through the effort required to obtain it. Once inside, water changes character. It is no longer abundant or anonymous. It becomes specific. This water is for washing hands. That water is reserved for cooking. Another portion will be saved for cleaning later, when the day's work has left its residue behind. These distinctions are not written down, but they are enforced through habit. The body learns to recognize them instinctively, adjusting use without conscious calculation. Washing is never casual. To wash one's hands is to engage in a brief but deliberate ritual shaped by necessity rather than comfort. The basin is set in place with care, positioned where it will not tip, where light is just sufficient to see what must be done. The water is poured slowly, measured by sound as much as sight, each movement controlled to avoid waste. There is no excess in this action, no indulgence in abundance. Every drop has arrived through effort, and that effort remains present in the mind as the water settles into the basin. Hands are cleaned quickly and efficiently, fingers rubbing together with practiced precision. The motion is familiar, almost automatic, learned through repetition rather than instruction. There is no lingering beneath a stream, no letting the water run freely over skin for the sake of sensation. Warmth, when it exists at all, is fleeting and never taken for granted. More often the water is cold, its touch sharp and immediate, encouraging speed rather than reflection. The body does not relax into the moment. It completes the task and moves on. The sensation is brief, functional, and unmistakably purposeful. Skin reddens slightly from the temperature, then settles as the hands are dried. Cloths used for drying are chosen carefully, already worn soft from use, and they are hung afterward in places where they can dry without stealing warmth from the room. Even this final step is part of the ritual, ensuring that nothing remains damp longer than necessary. When the task is finished, the remaining water is not discarded thoughtlessly. The basin is inspected, its contents assessed. If the water is still clear enough, it may be poured into another container, set aside for cleaning surfaces or rinsing utensils later. If it has grown cloudy, it may still serve a lesser purpose, one that does not require purity. Water circulates within the apartment, passing from task to task in a quiet economy, each use extracting a little more value before it is finally released. This circulation shapes daily awareness. The body learns to anticipate where water will go next, how it can be stretched further, how its usefulness diminishes gradually rather than ending abruptly. Nothing involving water is isolated. Each act connects to the next, forming a chain of small decisions that structure the day. Through this process, washing becomes more than cleanliness. It becomes a discipline, a reminder that even the simplest acts are governed by limits, and that within those limits, care and intention make all the difference. Bathing, when it occurs, is an event of greater significance. It requires planning fuel and time. Water must be heated often in stages, each addition monitored carefully. The process is slow, demanding attention from start to finish. The room fills with steam, briefly a rare transformation that alters the air and softens surfaces. But this change is fleeting. As quickly as it arrives, it dissipates, leaving behind dampness that must be managed before it settles into the walls. The body experiences bathing not as indulgence, but as effort. Entering warm water offers momentary relief, but it is not without cost. The contrast between air and water is sharp. The awareness of limited supply remains constant. There is no forgetting the labor that made this moment possible. Even in warmth, the body remains alert, conscious of time and necessity. When the bath ends, the water is drained, collected if possible, and the room returns to its usual state. Cleaning follows similar rules. Floors are washed infrequently, not because cleanliness is unvalued, but because water is precious. When cleaning does occur, it is thorough and purposeful. The effort expended must justify the resources used. Surfaces are scrubbed, carefully focusing on areas of greatest need. Corners and edges receive attention only when required. The apartment teaches selectivity through limitation. Water also shapes the handling of food. Ingredients are washed quickly. Utensils are cleaned immediately after use to avoid waste later. Nothing is soaked unnecessarily. Cooking water may be reused when possible, incorporated into other tasks. Every decision reflects an understanding that water is not infinite, even within the walls of the home. The temperature of water adds another layer of complexity. Cold water discourages unnecessary contact, while warm water requires fuel and time. The choice between them is rarely about preference. It is about feasibility. In colder months, water stored indoors grows frigid. Its touch uncomfortable, sometimes painful. Washing becomes an exercise in endurance, completed swiftly to minimize exposure. Warm water, when available, is rationed carefully, its benefits weighed against the cost of producing it. The sound of water is also significant. The pour from a jug into a basin is loud in the quiet apartment, drawing attention. It marks activity, announces intention. Others nearby become aware of its use, adjusting their own plans accordingly. Water use is rarely private. It is a shared resource, even within a single household, its presence felt by all. Spills are treated with seriousness. Water that escapes its container must be addressed immediately. Floors are dried. Cloths are wrung out and set aside. Moisture left unattended invites cold rot and discomfort. The apartment responds poorly to dampness, holding it close rather than allowing it to evaporate. Those who live here learn this quickly. Water must be controlled not only in use, but in aftermath. Even wastewater retains importance. It is carried away, deliberately disposed of in designated places, never without awareness of where it goes and how it leaves the apartment. The act of removal completes the cycle, returning the space to readiness for the next use. Only when the basin is empty and dry does the task feel finished. Over time, this constant attention shapes the body's relationship to water. What might once have been a background element becomes central. Hands learn restraint. Movements become economical. The mind anticipates needs in advance, reducing unnecessary use. Water ceases to be an abstract concept. It becomes a material presence defined by weight, temperature, and effort. The apartment reinforces these lessons quietly. There are no reminders posted on walls, no explicit rules spoken aloud. The limitations are structural, built into the way water enters and exits the space. Those who ignore them experience discomfort immediately. Those who adapt find a narrow path of balance where daily needs are met without excess strain. At night, water retreats from attention. Containers are set aside. Basins are emptied and dried. The sounds associated with its use fade, replaced by the deeper quiet of rest. But even in stillness, its influence remains. The body carries traces of its temperature. The skin remembers the shock of cold or the brief relief of warmth. These sensations linger, shaping the transition into sleep. Water in this apartment is never invisible. It announces itself through effort, through sound, through consequence. It demands respect, not through scarcity alone, but through the labor it requires. To live here is to understand that water is not simply part of life. It is an event anticipated, managed, and concluded with care. And in this careful handling, the apartment teaches another form of endurance, one measured not in grand gestures, but in countless small decisions made day after day within its enclosing walls. Smell is the most patient presence in the apartment. It does not announce itself suddenly, and it does not leave when asked. It arrives, slowly settles quietly, and stays long after its source has disappeared. Unlike sound or light, which pass through and move on, smell lingers. It clings to surfaces, folds itself into fabric, and becomes part of the space in ways that are difficult to separate or undo. The apartment has no true circulation of air. Windows open only partially, constrained by their design and by caution, and even when they do, they offer no clean exchange. Air does not flow through the space so much as hesitate at its edges. What enters is never neutral. Outside, air brings the city with it, smoke from coal and wood, the dampness of stone streets, the faint trace of refuse and animal presence that lingers in 19th century Paris. It arrives already weighted, already marked by life beyond the walls. Inside air, by contrast, carries the accumulated traces of domestic existence, cooking bodies, fabric labor rest. When the two meet, they mingle briefly, but neither replaces the other. They fold together, layer upon layer, then settle again. Opening a window is therefore not a cleansing act, but a negotiation. The hand hesitates before unlatching it, aware that what comes in will not simply carry what is unwanted away. The movement changes the character of the room without resolving it. Smoke thins, but does not disappear. Dampness shifts rather than evaporates. Smell redistributes itself, spreading into corners it had not reached before. The apartment accepts the outside, only partially filtering it through thick walls and narrow openings that resist true renewal. Freshness in the modern sense does not exist here. There is no expectation that air should feel empty or neutral. Instead, air is understood as something to be managed like water, or heat. Windows are opened at specific times for specific reasons and closed again quickly. Curtains are adjusted to control drafts. Doors are positioned to guide air along familiar paths, encouraging movement where it is tolerable and discouraging it where it is not. The goal is not purity, but balance. Over time, inhabitants learn the apartment's patterns. They know which windows invite the least smoke, which hours offer the gentlest exchange, which rooms benefit from brief exposure, and which suffer from it. This knowledge is acquired slowly through discomfort and small corrections until it becomes instinctive. Air is treated not as an invisible background, but as a presence with weight and consequence. In this way, the apartment teaches restraint. It does not promise relief through openness. It offers only careful adjustment, a constant effort to keep the interior livable without ever expecting it to become light or clean. Air remains something that belongs to the space as much as to the people within it, shaped by walls, habits, and limits lingering long after movement has stopped. Cooking is the most obvious contributor. Heat draws smells upward, but ceilings are high and ventilation imperfect. Steam and smoke rise spread, then settle back down, depositing themselves onto walls and beams. Even after a meal has been prepared and eaten, its presence remains. The scent of boiled vegetables of fat, rendered slowly of bread, warmed near a flame. Each one lingers, faintly layered, atop the last. Over time, these layers blend into something less distinct, a general atmosphere that defines the apartment more than any single ingredient. The kitchen holds these smells most strongly, but they do not remain confined there. They travel along corridors, slip beneath doors, settle into adjoining rooms. Fabrics absorb them readily. Curtains, blankets, clothing hung to dry indoors, all become carriers. Once absorbed, the smell is released, slowly, warmed by bodies stirred by movement. Even rooms that appear untouched by labor carry its traces softened but persistent. Human bodies add their own contribution. Washing is infrequent and purposeful, not indulgent. Skin holds on to the day's exertions, especially in colder months when water is used sparingly. Sweat, though not always obvious, accumulates, subtly mingling with fabric and air. The scent of bodies is not shocking or offensive. It is expected. It becomes part of how people recognize one another, how they read proximity and presence without sight. Clothing plays a central role in this quiet exchange. Garments are worn repeatedly before being washed, especially those intended for warmth. Wool and heavy fabric trap scent, efficiently holding it close. When clothing is removed at the end of the day, it does not release its smell entirely. It transfers it to chairs, to bedding, to the air itself. The apartment becomes a shared reservoir, holding the combined traces of those who live within it. Cleaning offers limited relief. Floors are scrubbed when necessary, surfaces wiped when time and water allow. These efforts reduce visible dirt, but do little to remove smell entirely. Dampness introduced during cleaning can even intensify certain odors, encouraging them to rise and spread. Soap, when used, adds another layer rather than replacing what was there before. Its scent fades quickly, leaving the deeper, older smells undisturbed. The building itself contributes as well. Stone walls retain moisture, especially in colder seasons. This dampness produces a faint mineral scent, one that never fully disappears. Wood absorbs and releases odors, depending on temperature and humidity, acting as both container and conduit. Over time, the apartment develops a stable olfactory character, recognizable to those who live there, difficult to describe to anyone else. Smell also moves unevenly through the space. Certain corners trap it more effectively. Areas with less light and less airflow become reservoirs, holding on to traces that other parts of the apartment release more quickly. Closet storage areas, spaces beneath furniture, these accumulate scent, quietly revealing themselves only when disturbed. Opening a rarely used door releases a concentrated breath of the past, a compressed reminder of how long the space has remained unchanged. Unlike noise, smell does not demand immediate response. It can be tolerated, ignored, adapted to. Over time, inhabitants become less aware of it, not because it disappears, but because perception adjusts. The body learns what belongs and what does not. Familiar smells fade into the background, while unfamiliar ones stand out sharply. In this way, smell becomes a form of knowledge, a way of understanding what is normal within the apartment and what signals change. Illness announces itself first through smell. A sick body alters the air subtly through breath, through bedding, through the presence of remedies or food prepared differently. These changes are noticed quickly, even before visible symptoms appear. The apartment holds these signs close, amplifying their presence. There is no place for them to escape, no way to isolate them entirely. Sickness becomes communal not only through contact, but through shared air. Night intensifies this awareness. As movement slows and windows are closed against the cold, smells settle more deeply. The apartment grows heavier, more enclosed. Breath becomes more noticeable. Fabrics release the warmth they have stored during the day, along with whatever they have absorbed. Sleep occurs within this atmosphere, uninterrupted by expectations of neutrality or cleanliness. The body accepts what surrounds it, adjusts, and rests. Attempts to control smell are careful and limited. Herbs may be hung small amounts of scented materials placed discreetly to soften the air. These are not meant to eliminate odor, only to shift it slightly to add something familiar and reassuring. Their effect is temporary, subtle, never overpowering. Strong scents would be intrusive, drawing attention to themselves in a space that values restraint. Over time, the apartment smell becomes inseparable from its identity. It is not one scent, but many layered and intertwined. Those who live within it rarely notice it consciously, but they would recognize its absence immediately. Stepping into a different space, a place with other air, other materials feels disorienting at first, not because it is worse or better, but because it lacks the familiar accumulation. The apartment does not allow smell to leave easily because it is not designed for release. Its walls are thick, its openings few. What enters tends to stay. This containment reinforces continuity, preserving traces of the past within the present. The space remembers what has happened within it, not through objects or marks alone, but through the air itself. Living here means accepting that the environment is shared at the most basic level. Breath, labor, rest all contribute to the same enclosed atmosphere. There is no personal bubble of air, no separation between one body's presence and another's. This intimacy is not chosen, but it is unavoidable. Over time, it fosters a quiet tolerance, an understanding that some aspects of life cannot be kept separate. In this way, smell becomes one of the apartment's strongest teachers. It instructs without words, reminding its inhabitants that nothing disappears entirely, that every action leaves a trace. It encourages moderation, awareness, and patience. Excess lingers. Carelessness accumulates. Attention, though limited in its power, can shape the space gradually. As the night deepens and activity fades, the apartment holds on to the day's remnants. Cooking has ended, bodies have grown still, water has been set aside, Yet, the air remains full, carrying faint impressions of all that has passed. There is no clean break between day and night here. Only a soft settling as smells drift merge and wait to be stirred again when morning returns. Within these walls, smell has no exit, and because of that, it becomes part of the rhythm of existence. It binds moments together, links one day to the next, and reminds those who live here that space is not empty. It is inhabited in ways that extend beyond sight and sound, shaping experience quietly, continuously, and without exception. Light enters the apartment cautiously, never all at once, never without conditions. It does not arrive as a steady presence that can be relied upon. It comes in fragments shaped by the angle of the sun, the depth of the windows, the thickness of the walls. From the moment morning begins, light dictates what can be done, where it can be done, and how long it may continue. Time here is not measured by clocks so much as by illumination. Windows are tall but narrow set, deep into stone that absorbs brightness before it can spread. The glass is imperfect, slightly uneven, softening what passes through it. As a result, light pools rather than fills. It gathers on certain patches of floor, touches the edge of a table, grazes a section of wall, then moves on. Rooms do not brighten evenly. Some remain dim, even at midday, while others glow briefly before returning to shadow. The apartment teaches patience through this unevenness, reminding its inhabitants that light is not theirs to command. Morning begins not when the body wakes, but when light becomes usable. Tasks that require vision wait until illumination reaches the right height and angle. Reading, mending, writing, preparing food. These activities migrate through the apartment as the sun moves. A chair is pulled closer to the window. A table is shifted slightly to catch the glow. The body follows these adjustments instinctively, learning to work where light allows and to stop when it withdraws. There is no wastefulness in this movement. Light is treated as a resource, managed carefully, and used fully while it lasts. Curtains are drawn back just enough to admit what is needed, then adjusted again to reduce glare or cold. Too much openness invites drafts and dampness. Too little leaves the room unusable. Each adjustment is small, precise, learned through repetition rather than instruction. As the day progresses, the apartment changes character with the light. Shadows stretch and contract, altering the sense of space. Corners that felt distant in the morning grow closer in the afternoon. Objects appear and disappear as illumination shifts. The apartment does not present a stable interior. It transforms continuously, asking its inhabitants to adapt their movements and expectations in response. When the sun begins to lower, the apartment prepares for limitation. Light fades first in the inner rooms, those farthest from the windows. Tasks are completed quickly or postponed. The body senses the change before it becomes obvious, speeding up unconsciously as shadows deepen. This awareness is ingrained. Light has always controlled the pace of the day, and the body has learned to listen. Artificial light offers only partial relief. Candles, oil lamps, and later gas provide illumination, but at a cost. Each flame consumes fuel, demands attention, and introduces risk. Light after dark is never casual. It is intentional, measured, and often restrained. A single candle may serve an entire room, its glow limited, its reach modest. It does not banish darkness so much as carve out a small temporary clearing within it. The quality of this light changes everything, not suddenly, but with a steady authority that reshapes the room minute by minute. Shadows grow sharper, their edges more defined. cutting familiar spaces into uncertain shapes. Depth becomes difficult to judge. Corners seem closer than they are, while objects just beyond the reach of light feel farther away, almost detached from the room itself. The apartment appears to contract its walls, pressing inward as darkness claims more territory. What once felt spacious in daylight now feels contained, even intimate, as though the room has drawn a boundary around the remaining light and asked everything else to wait beyond it. Objects respond to this transformation by becoming unfamiliar. Chairs cast elongated silhouettes that stretch across the floor, distorting proportions the eye knows well in brighter hours. A table leg appears thicker, heavier. A hanging garment turns into a shifting outline rather than a recognizable form. The mind fills in gaps cautiously, no longer trusting sight without hesitation. Movement slows not only to conserve fuel, but because the eye must work harder, gathering information more carefully. Each step is placed with intention. Each reach is measured. The body adjusts instinctively, adopting a quieter rhythm that aligns with the reduced visibility. This change carries into behavior. Conversations soften voices, lowering as though sound itself might disturb the fragile balance between light and dark. Words become fewer, more deliberate. Gestures grow economical, stripped of excess motion. There is no room for distraction here. The apartment grows inward-focused, drawing its occupants closer to the small island of illumination that remains. People sit nearer to one another, not necessarily for warmth or comfort, but because that is where seeing is still possible. Beyond this circle, the room recedes into suggestion rather than certainty. Gaslighting, where present, alters this dynamic, slightly extending the usable hours of the evening without fully transforming them. Its flame does not flicker as unpredictably as a candle's, but it is never still. It hisses softly, a constant reminder of its presence and its appetite. It requires attention adjustment, monitoring care. Its glow spreads farther, steadier, yet it still feels provisional, as though it might withdraw at any moment. Even with gaslight does not dominate the room. It negotiates with it. This steadier illumination allows tasks to continue a little longer. Hands can work with more confidence, eyes strain less, but abundance remains out of reach. The light does not invite expansion. It simply postpones closure. Darkness remains close, pressing gently against the edges of the glow, waiting just beyond the illuminated circle. The apartment understands this balance well. Night has not been defeated, only managed, held at a respectful distance for a short while. The management of light shapes daily decisions long before evening arrives. Work that can be completed by daylight is prioritized, instinctively scheduled for hours when the sun is most cooperative. Tasks migrate through rooms to follow illumination, then conclude when it fades. Activities that require artificial light are considered carefully weighed against cost, effort, and fatigue. Often they are postponed or abandoned altogether, not because they lack importance, but because conditions no longer justify their continuation. There is no expectation that every intention will be fulfilled. The apartment does not support such ambitions. It encourages acceptance of incompletion, teaching that some things must wait not for motivation or willpower, but for light itself. This lesson settles deeply. Over time, it shapes patience, humility, and a quiet understanding of limits. The day ends not when everything is finished, but when light withdraws its permission. Light also defines rest. The body does not stay awake simply because it can. When illumination diminishes, the day concludes regardless of whether energy remains. Sleep arrives not always as a desire, but as a consequence. The apartment does not support extended wakefulness. It gently insists on closure, drawing curtains, lowering flames, and guiding its inhabitants toward stillness. Even at night, light never disappears entirely. Moonlight filters in, faintly outlining window frames, catching the edges of furniture. This pale illumination offers reassurance without utility. It reminds the sleeper of space without inviting activity. The apartment remains visible enough to feel contained, but dark enough to discourage movement. The balance is delicate, maintained by architecture rather than intention. Light carries emotional weight as well. Brightness suggests activity, possibility, engagement. Diminished light invites introspection, quiet withdrawal. Over time, these associations become deeply ingrained. The body responds to light levels, automatically shifting mood and energy without conscious thought. The apartment reinforces this relationship daily, aligning inner states with external conditions. Seasonal changes intensify these effects. In winter, daylight is brief and precious. The apartment feels dim, even at midday, its walls holding on to shadow. Activities compress into narrower windows of time. Evenings arrive early, extending the period of artificial light or darkness. In summer, light lingers longer, softening the apartment's edges, offering temporary expansion. Yet even then, the fundamental pattern remains unchanged. Light governs time, not the other way around. The apartment never allows light to be taken for granted. It demands attention, adjustment, and respect. Those who live within it learn to read its signals, to anticipate shifts, to align their bodies and routines accordingly. This alignment becomes second nature, guiding life at a pace dictated not by desire, but by illumination. As night settles fully, the last sources of light are extinguished deliberately. Flames are lowered or snuffed out. Curtains are drawn tight against cold and drafts. The apartment returns to its default state, dark and enclosed, holding its inhabitants in familiar shadow. In this darkness, time loses definition. Hours blur. The body releases its grip on the day and yields to rest. Within these walls, light does not simply reveal space. It organizes existence. It defines beginnings and endings, effort, and rest, possibility and limitation. It teaches restraint and awareness, shaping life through absence as much as presence. And as the night deepens with light reduced to memory and anticipation, the apartment settles into its quiet authority, having once again guided the day from its first faint glow to its final fading trace. Sound is never contained within a single room. In this apartment, it moves freely, slipping through walls, along floors, and up stairwells with a persistence that cannot be fully controlled. Even when voices are lowered and movement softened, sound finds a way. It does not announce itself as intrusion. It arrives as presence, subtle but constant, reminding those inside that they are never entirely alone. The walls are thick, built of stone meant to endure, but they do not seal. Instead, they transmit selectively. Some noises disappear, almost entirely absorbed by layers of material. Others carry unexpectedly, far distorted but recognizable. A footstep above becomes a dull thud overhead. A chair moved in the next room registers as a faint scrape. The apartment translates sound rather than blocking it, turning distinct actions into shared experience. Floors play a central role in this quiet exchange. Wood boards flex under weight, responding audibly to movement. Over time, they learn the rhythms of those who walk across them daily. Certain boards creak reliably, announcing presence long before a person enters a room. These sounds become familiar markers, allowing inhabitants to recognize one another without sight. The apartment listens, and it teaches those within it to listen as well. Staircases amplify this effect. They act as vertical corridors for sound carrying noise upward and downward through the building. A step taken below arrives softened but unmistakable. Voices echo briefly, then fade, leaving behind the knowledge that someone has passed through shared space. Even when unseen, others remain perceptible. The building does not permit anonymity easily. It insists on awareness. Doors offer limited control. Closing one alters the character of sound, but rarely eliminates it. Voices become muffled rather than silenced. Movements register as vibrations rather than clear actions. The act of closing a door is therefore symbolic as much as practical. It signals intent privacy, rest separation, while acknowledging that complete isolation is impossible. The apartment respects these signals, only partially allowing boundaries without enforcing them fully. At night, sound grows more pronounced. With light reduced and movement slowed, even the smallest noise carries weight. A cough resonates more deeply. A shift in bed produces a faint creak that seems louder in the stillness. The building's own responses would, adjusting to temperature stones settling imperceptibly, become part of the soundscape. These are not disruptions. They are reminders that the space itself is active, responsive, alive to change. Sleep occurs within this shared acoustic environment. Silence, in the absolute sense, does not exist. Instead, there is a steady background of presence. Distant breathing, occasional movement, the muted life of others continuing nearby. The body learns to accept these sounds, incorporating them into rest rather than resisting them. Over time, unfamiliar quiet can feel more unsettling than familiar noise. The apartment teaches this adaptation gently, night after night. During the day, sound organizes activity with a quiet authority that rarely needs to be acknowledged. Certain tasks are performed in specific rooms, not only for convenience, but because those rooms absorb or release sound in predictable ways. Work that produces steady noise, scraping, pounding, repeated motion, is confined to spaces where its impact is least disruptive, places already accustomed to movement and activity. Lighter tasks migrate toward rooms where voices can soften without strain, where words do not need to travel far to be understood. Even silence is distributed, intentionally reserved for spaces where concentration or rest is most valued. Children, when present, learn these distinctions quickly, often before they understand the reasons behind them. They are guided away from some rooms, encouraged toward others, corrected gently but consistently until the apartment's expectations become instinctive. These rules are never written, rarely spoken aloud. They are absorbed through repetition, through subtle cues, through the apartment's quiet feedback when noise travels farther than intended. This arrangement reinforces hierarchy without ever naming it. Sound does not affect every room equally, and those differences shape daily experience. Rooms closer to shared spaces, the corridor, the staircase, the entrance, are more exposed. Life there is more permeable, interrupted frequently by the movements and sounds of others. Conversations are punctuated by passing footsteps. Work is accompanied by the awareness of activity beyond the walls. Those who occupy these spaces grow accustomed to interruption, developing a tolerance for distraction that becomes part of their rhythm. They learn to pause and resume to focus amid background noise, to accept intrusion as ordinary. Deeper within the apartment rooms, experience fewer disturbances. Sound arrives softened, filtered, less immediate. In these spaces, quiet feels more protected, and those who occupy them become sensitive to its disruption. A sudden noise feels sharper, more intrusive. The apartment does not equalize these conditions or attempt to correct them. It reflects them, allowing sound to distribute itself according to structure rather than fairness. Arguments, when they occur, are shaped by acoustics as much as by emotion. Raised voices do not remain confined to their origin. They travel outward, slipping through walls and along floors, spreading beyond their intended audience. Even restrained exchanges leave traces elsewhere, their tension transmitted through cadence and volume rather than words themselves. A clipped tone, a sudden pause, a hurried movement. These signals are carried into neighboring spaces, announcing conflict without detail. The apartment does not keep secrets easily. It encourages moderation not through moral judgment, but through consequence. Those who speak too loudly are heard whether they wish to be or not. Those who wish to remain private must lower their voices, slow their speech, or choose their moments carefully, waiting for times when others are absent or asleep. Over time, this awareness shapes communication itself. Words are chosen with care. Silence becomes a strategy, and in this way, the apartment teaches restraint, reminding its inhabitants that every sound belongs not only to the speaker, but to the shared space that carries it. Laughter behaves differently. It travels lightly, often softened into something almost pleasant by distance and distortion. A laugh heard through a wall loses its sharpness, becoming a suggestion rather than a declaration. It reassures without demanding attention. In this way, sound carries emotional information across boundaries, connecting lives that rarely intersect directly. Music, when present, transforms the apartment briefly. Its patterns move through rooms more cohesively than speech, filling space with intention. Yet even music is constrained. It must remain quiet enough to avoid complaint, short enough to justify its presence. The apartment tolerates it as an exception rather than a norm. When it ends, the return to ordinary sound feels heavier, more pronounced. The building itself contributes continuously. Pipes carry water with a muted rush. Doors open and close elsewhere, their movements translated into faint echoes. The outside world intrudes occasionally, a carriage passing a shout from the street. But these sounds arrive, filtered, distant, rarely distinct. The apartment prioritizes interior life, allowing external noise only as background reminder rather than active participant. Over time, inhabitants develop an intimate awareness of this soundscape. They learn to distinguish between what requires attention and what can be ignored. A new sound stands out immediately, signaling change or disruption. Familiar noises fade into the background, becoming part of the environment rather than events. This selective listening conserves energy, allowing focus where it is needed most. Sound also influences posture and movement. Steps are placed carefully at night to minimize noise. Objects are handled gently. Doors are guided closed rather than released. These habits are not born of courtesy alone, but of shared necessity. Noise travels whether intended or not, and its consequences ripple outward. The apartment teaches economy of sound, as surely as it teaches economy of movement. For those who live here, awareness of others is constant but unobtrusive. It does not demand interaction. It simply confirms coexistence. Lives overlap acoustically, even when they remain separate physically. This overlap creates a sense of continuity, a shared rhythm that persists regardless of individual schedules. The apartment hums quietly with collective presence. In moments of true quiet, when movement pauses, and even the building seems to rest, the absence of sound feels significant. It signals a rare alignment, sleep settling simultaneously, activity suspended briefly across multiple lives. These moments are fleeting. They pass quickly, replaced by the inevitable return of subtle noise. Yet they linger in memory, not as silence, but as balance. Sound in this apartment is not an interruption to life. It is one of its organizing principles. It shapes behavior, reinforces boundaries, and connects separate existences through shared experience. The walls do not divide so much as filter, allowing enough transmission to maintain awareness without overwhelming the senses. Within these limits, life continues layered and intertwined. As night deepens and the apartment settles into its familiar patterns, sound remains present, steady, and reassuring. It carries the knowledge that others are near enduring the same conditions, negotiating the same space. In this shared acoustic world, isolation is softened, privacy is partial, and existence unfolds collectively, one faint sound at a time. The apartment is not a single, unified space. It is divided quietly, not by walls alone, but by paths. Some routes are meant to be seen. Others exist to remain unnoticed. This division is most clearly revealed through the geography of service, the hidden map traced by those whose work sustains the life of the apartment while remaining deliberately out of view. These paths do not announce themselves. They are narrower, less finished, less forgiving. A secondary staircase steeper than the main one turns sharply and climbs without pause. Its steps are worn unevenly polished, smooth by use rather than care. Light reaches it reluctantly, often filtered through small windows or borrowed from adjacent rooms. This is not a place designed for rest or reflection. It exists to move bodies efficiently from one obligation to the next. Those who use these paths learn them intimately. Their bodies memorize the turns, the low ceilings, the places where a shoulder must angle inward to pass without brushing the wall. Hands know where to steady themselves in the dark, where a railing dips or disappears. The route becomes second nature, navigated without thought, even when arms are full or the hour is late. The apartment teaches this knowledge through repetition, not instruction. Rooms connected to this geography are smaller, lower, and more utilitarian. They are placed where light is weakest and air least cooperative. Often near the kitchen or beneath the roof, these spaces are not intended to host life so much as contain it between tasks. A narrow bed fits tightly against a wall. Storage replaces furniture. Personal objects are kept minimal, not because attachment is absent, but because space does not permit accumulation. The room does not invite lingering. It allows only what is necessary. The air here behaves differently, as though the apartment itself has assigned this space a separate climate. Heat gathers unevenly, rushing upward in summer, and lingering near the ceiling where it offers little relief, while in winter it abandons the room almost entirely, slipping away through gaps and thin partitions. Cold settles quickly and stays pressing close to the floor and the walls. Smells arrive early and leave late, drawn in from nearby kitchens and workrooms, carried by warm currents and then trapped by stillness. They linger long after their source has moved on, becoming part of the background rather than an event. Noise, too, behaves without restraint. The building's hidden systems, beams, pipes' narrow cavities carry sound efficiently, transmitting footsteps, water, and distant voices without softening them. Every movement elsewhere announces itself here. Sleep occurs under these conditions, shaped less by the need for comfort than by proximity to labor. Rest is not protected or insulated. It is fitted carefully around work, taken when possible, interrupted when necessary, accepted as partial rather than complete. Movement through these areas follows a rhythm distinct from the rest of the apartment, one that begins before the household stirs and continues after it settles. Tasks start earlier and end later, stretching the day beyond the hours marked by light or social routine. Time here does not align neatly with daylight or shared meals. Instead, it responds to need. Water must be fetched before others wake when staircases are empty and corridors quiet. Fires are tended softly, coaxed back to life without drawing attention. Floors are swept while rooms are still vacant before footsteps scatter dust and noise returns. This timing is deliberate. It preserves the illusion of effortlessness elsewhere, allowing the visible spaces to appear orderly, prepared untouched by the work that sustains them. When the main rooms come alive, when voices rise and chairs are drawn closer together, the labor that makes that ease possible has already been completed, absorbed into the background, leaving behind only the appearance of calm and continuity. The geography of service also shapes visibility. Those who move along these routes are present everywhere and nowhere at once. They hear conversations without participating. They pass through rooms, briefly leaving no trace once the task is complete. Their movement is efficient, quiet, designed to minimize disruption. Over time, this invisibility becomes a skill practiced and refined. The apartment rewards it with fewer obstacles, smoother passage, predictable response. Doors along these paths are narrower and less ornate, shaped by utility rather than impression. Their frames are plain edges, worn smooth by countless passages, surfaces marked more by hands than by decoration. They open inward, a practical choice that allows them to be closed quickly and decisively, sealing the space behind without ceremony. When they move, the sound they produce is subdued, a muted click or soft scrape rather than a resonant thud. This quietness is intentional. It ensures that movement can continue without announcing itself, that tasks can unfold without drawing the attention of those in the more visible rooms. Even the hardware reflects this purpose. Handles are simple, chosen for durability rather than beauty, shaped to be grasped easily even when hands are occupied. Hinges are thick and sturdy, built to endure constant use without complaint. They do not squeak or resist. They perform their function and disappear. Nothing along these paths invites inspection or admiration. There is no encouragement to pause, no visual cue that suggests this space holds significance beyond its role in maintaining continuity. Everything here supports the uninterrupted flow of work. This division of space reinforces a division of presence that extends beyond architecture into behavior. The main rooms are arranged for stillness, conversation, and display. They invite the body to slow, to settle, to orient itself toward others. Furniture faces inward. Light is managed to highlight faces and gestures. These rooms ask their occupants to be seen to participate in a shared moment that unfolds deliberately. By contrast, the service areas are arranged for motion. Their layouts prioritize clear paths, accessible storage, efficient reach. They ask the body to move, to carry, to adjust continuously in response to need. Crossing between these worlds requires constant recalibration. Posture changes instinctively. Shoulders straighten or relax depending on direction. Pace shifts, slowing in rooms meant for presence and quickening in spaces meant for passage. The voice responds as well, lowering when moving through service areas, rising slightly when entering spaces of interaction. These adjustments are not conscious decisions. They are learned responses reinforced through repetition until they occur without thought. The apartment does not attempt to bridge these differences or soften their contrast. It preserves them carefully, allowing each area to fulfill its purpose without interference. The transition from one to the other is immediate and unmistakable. A single step can carry a body from stillness into motion, from visibility into near invisibility. In this way, the apartment maintains order not through instruction or enforcement, but through spatial design. It teaches where to linger and where to pass through, where to speak and where to remain silent, shaping presence as surely as it shapes movement. The boundary is not always rigid. There are moments of overlap, shared corridors, brief exchanges, passing acknowledgements. But even these moments are shaped by awareness of place. A conversation held near the kitchen is different from one held near the window. The same words carry different weight depending on where they are spoken. The apartment enforces these distinctions subtly through acoustics, through light, through the simple fact of who is expected to be where. At night, this geography becomes more pronounced. The visible rooms settle into stillness, lights lowered, doors closed. The service paths remain active longer. Final tasks are completed quietly. Objects are returned to their places. The apartment is prepared for rest through a sequence of movements that remain unseen. When sleep arrives in the main rooms, it does so, supported by labor that continues elsewhere, briefly, until the day can be considered complete. The roof space, when used, occupies a unique position within this map. It is both removed and exposed. Close to the sky, yet far from comfort, it experiences extremes more sharply than other rooms. Heat gathers intensely in summer. Cold settles deeply in winter. The space responds quickly to changes in weather, offering little insulation from the outside world. Those who occupy it learn to read these shifts instinctively, adjusting their routines and expectations accordingly. Despite these conditions, familiarity grows. Even the most constrained space becomes known over time. The body learns where to place objects, how to navigate low beams, which sounds signal approaching footsteps. This knowledge provides a form of security. Within the limits imposed by the apartment, patterns emerge, and patterns offer predictability. The space does not become generous, but it becomes manageable. The geography of service also determines access to information. Sounds carry differently here. Conversations from main rooms arrive, fragmented, stripped of detail, but rich in tone. Laughter, tension, urgency, all are perceptible, even when words are not. This partial knowledge creates a unique awareness of the household, one shaped by proximity without inclusion. The apartment allows this awareness while maintaining separation, reinforcing roles through architecture rather than instruction. Over time, these spatial divisions influence identity. Where one moves, where one rests, where one is seen or unseen, these experiences accumulate, shaping perception of self and place. The apartment does not comment on this process. It simply provides the framework within which it unfolds. Those who live within it adapt, each in their own way, learning to inhabit the spaces allotted to them with efficiency and restraint. Even when circumstances change, the geography remains. New occupants inherit the same paths, the same divisions. The apartment retains its structure, indifferent to individual stories. Its layout preserves a particular order of movement and presence, repeating itself across years and lives. In this way, the space becomes a silent participant in the social arrangement it supports. As night deepens and activity finally slows, the service paths quiet as well. Doors close softly, steps fade. The apartment settles into a layered stillness, each area holding on to its purpose, even in rest. The visible rooms sleep. The hidden ones wait. And within this divided interior, the geography of service remains intact, ready to guide movement again when the next day begins, unchanged and unquestioned. Cleanliness in the apartment is not a simple matter of surfaces and water. It is not measured by brightness, by scentlessness, or by the absence of marks. It is measured instead by effort, intention, and restraint. To be clean here does not mean to be free of dirt. It means to have tried. It means to have managed what could be managed, and to have accepted what could not. The apartment does not make cleanliness easy. It resists it quietly at every turn. Dust settles quickly and returns without warning. Floors collect residue from shoes, from coal, from the slow breakdown of everyday materials. Walls absorb smoke and dampness, holding on to them long after the source has faded. Water, the most obvious tool of cleaning, is limited, heavy, and cold. Every attempt to impose order must contend with these conditions first. As a result, cleaning becomes selective. It cannot be constant, and it cannot be complete. Choices must be made. Certain areas receive attention more often than others, not because they are dirtier, but because they are seen. The main rooms are wiped, swept, arranged with care. Objects are returned to their places. Chairs are aligned. Tables are cleared. These actions signal control, stability, and respectability even when deeper layers of dirt remain untouched. Less visible spaces accumulate more freely, not because they are forgotten, but because they are understood. Corners gather dust quietly, the fine residue of daily life settling where feet do not tread and eyes do not linger. Storage areas grow cluttered over time, objects layered one atop another in arrangements shaped by memory rather than order. Floors beneath furniture are cleaned infrequently, if at all not out of carelessness, but out of necessity. Reaching them requires moving heavy pieces, expending strength and time that must be saved for tasks more pressing. This is not neglect so much as prioritization, a constant weighing of effort against reward. Effort is finite, and everyone in the apartment knows it. Water is precious, its weight, and cold felt each time it is lifted or poured. Time is already claimed by cooking, fetching, tending fires, and countless other obligations that cannot be postponed. The apartment demands constant maintenance simply to remain functional, to prevent small problems from becoming larger ones. Within this reality, cleanliness cannot be absolute. It must be negotiated, carefully adjusted to circumstances accepted as partial, rather than enforced as a rigid standard. The tools of cleaning reflect this understanding. Brooms are worn, their bristles uneven and splayed from years of sweeping the same paths. They do not collect everything in a single pass, and that is expected. Multiple strokes are required, each one pushing dirt a little farther, guiding it toward places where it can be contained rather than eliminated. Cloths are reused until they are threadbare, their fibers softened by repeated washing and wringing. When they can no longer serve one purpose, they are repurposed for another, cut down, folded differently, pressed into service, wherever a scrap of fabric can still be useful. Soap, when available, is treated with restraint. It is not applied generously or thoughtlessly. It is reserved for moments when its effect will matter most, when a surface must be presentable, when a stain threatens to linger, when illness requires extra care. The scent of soap is brief, never overpowering, fading quickly back into the background of the apartment's air. Nothing is discarded casually because replacement is never guaranteed. Each object has value until it proves beyond use. Even dirt is managed strategically. It is pushed aside, gathered into corners, swept into containers, tolerated in places where it causes no immediate harm. The goal is not elimination, but control. dirt becomes another element to be handled like water or heat, rather than an enemy to be conquered. It is allowed to exist within limits, watched for signs that it has begun to interfere with function or health. Only then does it demand direct attention. Through this process, the apartment teaches its inhabitants how to live within constraint. Cleanliness becomes a practice of judgment rather than a pursuit of perfection. It requires awareness of what matters most, acceptance of what cannot be addressed, and patience with the space itself. In learning these distinctions, those who live here come to understand that order is not something imposed from outside, but something negotiated daily, shaped by effort scarcity and the quiet logic of survival. Washing floors is an event rather than a routine. It requires preparation, water, and time. Furniture must be shifted carefully. Water must be warmed if possible, though often it is not. The act itself is laborious bending and scrubbing, followed by the immediate need to dry the surface to prevent cold and dampness from settling in. When it is finished, the result is temporary. The floor is cleaner, but not clean in any lasting sense. The effort is acknowledged internally, even if the outcome fades quickly. Cleanliness also extends to the body, but here too it is governed by practicality. Washing occurs when necessary, not when desired. Clothes are aired rather than washed, whenever possible, hung near windows or in courtyards to release some of what they have absorbed. Stains are tolerated. Wear is accepted. The expectation is not renewal, but maintenance. Bodies and garments are kept functional, presentable enough to fulfill their roles. Because of this, cleanliness becomes closely tied to judgment. It is read as a sign of character rather than circumstance. A tidy room suggests discipline. An orderly table implies care. These interpretations persist even when everyone understands at some level how difficult true cleanliness is to achieve. The apartment encourages this moral framing by making effort visible while hiding its limits. Guests notice what is presented to them. They see swept floors, arranged furniture, controlled spaces. They do not see the corners left untouched or the labor that has already been exhausted elsewhere. Cleanliness becomes performative, a surface expression of values rather than a comprehensive state. The apartment supports this performance by allowing certain areas to be managed effectively while others remain out of sight. This emphasis shapes behavior. Those who live here learn where to invest their energy for maximum effect. A quick sweep of the entryway matters more than a thorough cleaning of a storage space. Wiping a table where meals are shared carries more weight than scrubbing a wall that no one touches. These decisions are rarely articulated, but they are reinforced daily through response and recognition. Children absorb these lessons early. They are corrected not for making messes everywhere, but for doing so in the wrong places. A spill in a visible room prompts immediate attention. The same spill elsewhere may be addressed later, if at all. Through this pattern, they learn that cleanliness is not universal. It is contextual. It depends on who is watching and what is expected. Smell plays a role here as well. Certain odors are tolerated as part of life. Others are addressed quickly because they signal neglect rather than use. The difference is subtle and learned through experience. Cooking smells linger without shame. Dampness that suggests stagnation does not. The apartment reinforces these distinctions by amplifying some sense and absorbing others, guiding perception without instruction. The timing of cleaning further emphasizes its moral dimension. Cleaning often occurs when others are absent or asleep, minimizing disruption. Its results are enjoyed collectively, but its labor remains largely unseen. This separation allows cleanliness to be appreciated without constant awareness of the effort behind it. The apartment maintains this illusion, effectively presenting order as a stable condition rather than a temporary achievement. When illness enters the space, cleanliness takes on heightened significance. Surfaces are wiped more frequently. Bedding is aired when possible. Water is used more generously despite its cost. These actions are not merely practical responses. They are expressions of care, of responsibility, of moral duty. Even when their effectiveness is limited, they serve to affirm commitment to those who share the space. Despite all this effort, dirt never disappears entirely. It recedes and returns, shifting location rather than leaving. The apartment does not allow a state of lasting cleanliness. It only allows cycles of attention and neglect, each shaped by necessity. Over time, this reality fosters acceptance. The goal becomes not elimination, but balance. This balance influences emotional life as well. There is satisfaction in completing a cleaning task, however small. There is also resignation in knowing its effects will not endure. Both feelings coexist, shaping a relationship to labor that is steady rather than hopeful. The apartment does not reward ambition in cleanliness. It rewards consistency. Cleanliness here is therefore less about outcome than intention. It signals care, responsibility, and self-respect within limits that everyone understands, even if they are rarely discussed. The apartment becomes a stage on which these values are enacted daily through small, repeated gestures that leave subtle traces. At night, when movement slows and cleaning tools are set aside, the apartment holds what has been done. Floors may be swept, surfaces may be cleared, the air may feel marginally lighter. These changes are modest, but they are enough. They allow rest to arrive with a sense of completion, however temporary. In the morning, the cycle begins again. Dust returns, smells settle. Disorder threatens quietly from every corner. Cleanliness must be reasserted through effort, not assumed. This repetition reinforces its moral character. To clean is not to achieve a state. It is to participate in an ongoing discipline. Within these walls, cleanliness is never purely practical, because practicality alone would demand more than the apartment allows. Instead, it becomes a language of values spoken through limited means. It communicates care without promising perfection. It acknowledges constraint without surrendering responsibility. And in doing so, it shapes daily life as surely as cold water light sound, and space-binding intention to action in the quiet rhythm of endurance. Sleep in the apartment is never assumed. It is not something that arrives automatically when the body grows tired. It must be arranged, defended, and accepted on terms set by the space itself. Night does not transform the apartment into a place of rest, so much as expose the conditions under which rest might be possible. Every element that shaped the day, cold light sound, smell, labor, remains present, after darkness falls only rearranged. The approach to sleep begins long before anyone lies down. The apartment prepares itself slowly through a sequence of small closures. Flames are lowered, then extinguished. Curtains are drawn not for darkness alone, but to guard against drafts and the weight of night air pressing inward. Objects used during the day are returned to familiar places, not because order promises comfort, but because predictability reduces effort. Each step reduces the number of decisions that must be made once the body is ready to surrender. Beds are functional rather than inviting. They are placed where space allows, not where comfort would suggest. Frames are simple, sometimes uneven, responding audibly to weight. Mattresses offer firmness more than softness, their materials chosen for durability rather than relief. Bedding is layered carefully, not to create luxury, but to trap warmth. The body learns how many layers are necessary for the season, how to adjust them through the night as temperature shifts. This knowledge is practical, accumulated through many imperfect nights. The act of lying down is deliberate, approached with the same care that governs every other task within the apartment. Clothing is adjusted rather than removed entirely, especially in colder months, when fabric becomes a crucial layer of protection rather than a hindrance. Garments are smooth sleeves pulled back into place, collars settled to cover exposed skin. Each piece serves as insulation, a barrier against the chill that rises steadily from the floor and seeps upward through the bed frame. Blankets are pulled close with intention, their edges tucked carefully along the body's outline to minimize the narrow spaces where cold might slip in unnoticed. Nothing is left to chance. The body prepares itself as much as the bed does. The posture the body adopts is not random. It reflects habit built through repetition conservation, learned through necessity and memory, shaped by countless nights spent adjusting to the same conditions. Limbs draw inward, instinctively reducing exposed surface. Knees bend slightly, feet find warmth against one another. Shoulders curl forward just enough to protect the chest. This arrangement is neither rigid nor conscious. It emerges naturally, guided by experience rather than thought. The body arranges itself to hold what heat it can, creating a small, contained environment within the larger, unyielding space of the room. Even once settled sleep does not arrive immediately. The apartment remains audible, continuing its quiet conversation with itself. Distant footsteps move along corridors or staircases, softened by walls, but still perceptible. Pipes shift as water cools or warms elsewhere in the building, producing muted sounds that travel unpredictably. Wood responds to the lowering temperature with faint creaks and adjustments, each sound marking the passage of time rather than disrupting it. These noises are not interruptions. They are expected markers of night, as familiar as darkness itself. The body learns to listen without reacting. It registers these sounds briefly, then releases them, refusing to treat them as signals that demand action. Alertness softens into awareness. Over time, this acceptance becomes part of rest itself. Sleep is not achieved by silencing the environment, but by integrating it. The apartment does not quiet itself for those who wish to rest. Instead, it invites them to rest within its ongoing activity, to find stillness, not in absence, but in familiarity. Smell lingers more strongly at night. With windows closed and movement reduced, air grows heavier, layered with the day's traces. Cooking smells soften, but do not disappear. Fabric releases what it has absorbed. Breath becomes more noticeable in the stillness. Sleep unfolds within this atmosphere, not despite it. The body does not demand neutrality. It adapts, adjusting perception until familiar scents recede into background awareness. Cold plays a constant role. As fires die down and heat disperses upward, temperature drops. The body senses this shift, instinctively tightening muscles, drawing blankets closer without fully waking. Sleep is often shallow, punctuated by brief moments of adjustment. These movements are small, practiced, rarely remembered in the morning. They are part of the negotiation, the ongoing effort to remain still enough to rest, while responsive enough to remain warm. Light, even in its absence, continues to shape sleep with a quiet persistence. Darkness is never complete within the apartment. Moonlight filters in, faintly tracing the outlines of windows and door frames, turning familiar shapes into pale suggestions rather than solid forms. A distant glow from the street seeps inward, as well softened by layers of glass and cloth, reduced to a gentle haze rather than a defined source. These traces do not demand attention. They reassure rather than disturb. They confirm the boundaries of the room, allowing the sleeper to remain oriented, aware of space without needing to engage with it. The body rests more easily when it knows where it is, and these subtle cues provide that knowledge without inviting wakefulness. Changes in light are noticed, but not resisted. When a cloud passes across the moon, when a lantern outside is carried briefly through the street below, the illumination shifts momentarily. The eyelids register this movement, the mind acknowledges it without forming a thought, and then it fades. There is no impulse to respond, no reason to interpret the change as a signal. Light moves on, and sleep resumes its slow, uneven rhythm. The apartment teaches that awareness and rest can coexist, that the body does not need complete darkness to remain still. Sound too negotiates its place in the night. Voices fade as conversations end, but they never vanish entirely. Somewhere nearby, a cough breaks the quiet, brief, and unremarkable. A bed creaks as someone turns. A door closes softly, guided by a hand that knows how sound travels here. These noises do not intrude. They settle into the background, weaving themselves into the fabric of sleep. Each one confirms presence rather than disturbance, a reminder that life continues beyond the edge of consciousness. This shared soundscape creates a collective night rather than a solitary one. Sleep unfolds alongside others, accompanied by the faint evidence of their rest and movement. Absolute silence would feel unfamiliar here, even unsettling, because it would suggest absence rather than peace. The apartment teaches that rest does not require isolation. It requires continuity, a steady flow of small, recognizable sounds that signal normalcy. Within this environment, sleep becomes a communal experience shaped by the quiet coexistence of many lives resting at once. For those whose sleep occurs near spaces of labor, the negotiation is sharper. Early tasks intrude into the edges of rest. Water is fetched quietly before dawn. Fires are coaxed back to life. Movement resumes in certain parts of the apartment while others remain still. Sleep becomes segmented, taken in intervals rather than as a single uninterrupted state. The body adapts to this pattern, learning to enter and exit rest quickly, to accept partial restoration as sufficient. Dreams reflect these conditions. They are often shallow, fragmented, shaped by sensation rather than narrative. Cold sound and movement leak into them, blurring boundaries between waking and sleep. This is not a failure of rest, but a form adapted to environment. The body does not seek escape, it seeks endurance. Illness alters the negotiation further. Sleep becomes lighter, more vigilant. The body remains partially alert, responding to discomfort, to the need for water, to changes in temperature. Others in the apartment adjust as well, moving more softly, lowering voices, altering routines where possible. Rest becomes collective responsibility, shaped by care rather than comfort. Morning does not arrive abruptly. It seeps in through light and sound, through subtle changes in temperature and activity. The body wakes gradually, awareness returning before movement. Blankets are held a moment longer. The day's conditions are assessed instinctively, how cold it is, how loud the apartment has become, how much effort will be required to rise. Sleep ends not with refreshment guaranteed, but with readiness restored enough to begin again. This cycle repeats nightly, shaped by season, labor, and circumstance. Sleep is never perfected. It is managed. It exists in compromise sustained by habit and acceptance rather than expectation. The apartment offers no promise of deep rest. It offers only the possibility of enough. Over time, this teaches a different relationship to sleep. It is not something owed. It is something earned and preserved. Those who live here do not chase ideal rest. They accept what arrives and adjust to what does not. This acceptance becomes a quiet strength, allowing life to continue without resentment toward the space that contains it. Within these walls, sleep is not an escape from daily conditions. It is an extension of them. Cold sound light and labor do not pause at night. They rearrange themselves, demanding a different set of responses. The body meets these demands through adaptation rather than resistance, finding rest not in comfort, but in familiarity. By morning, the traces of night remain. Bedding is rumpled. The air holds the memory of breath and stillness. The apartment bears witness to another negotiation completed, another night endured. Nothing has been resolved permanently. The same conditions will return. And yet sleep has done its work. It has restored enough strength to face the day again. In this way, the apartment teaches its final lesson. Rest is not the absence of difficulty. It is the ability to continue within it. Sleep here is not a luxury. It is a practice repeated nightly, shaped by constraint, sustained by habit, and woven quietly into the enduring rhythm of life inside these walls. Morning does not reset the apartment. It does not erase what the night has arranged or undo the negotiations that allowed sleep to happen at all. Instead, morning arrives as a gradual reactivation, a slow return of pressure sound and obligation. The space wakes before the body does, and it does so in fragments. Light comes first thin and directional, arriving without ceremony. It does not flood the room or announce a new beginning. It slides quietly across familiar surfaces, tracing paths it has followed countless times before. It touches the edge of a table where hands rested the night before, catches the corner of a wall, smoothed by years of passing bodies, lingers briefly on the frame of a window, then moves on. Its progress is slow and deliberate, governed by angles rather than intention. Cold lingers longest near the floor, pooled there like a substance with weight, reluctant to release its hold, even as the day begins to assert itself. The air remains heavy with the memory of breath of fabric pressed close of hours spent motionless. Nothing feels new. Nothing has been reset. Everything feels resumed, as though the night has simply loosened its grip without letting go entirely. The body wakes into this continuity rather than into a fresh start. Awareness returns before movement, consciousness surfacing gently while muscles remain still. There is a brief assessment made without words, a quiet inventory taken instinctively, how cold the air feels against the face, how quiet the apartment has become, how much effort will be required to rise and begin again. Blankets are held for a moment longer, not out of reluctance or indulgence, but out of calculation. Warmth is a resource that must be surrendered carefully. The body lingers in this narrow margin between rest and exposure, preparing itself for the change before accepting it. Getting up is never a single action, never a decisive break. It unfolds in stages, each one easing the body closer to full wakefulness. Limbs move first cautiously, testing the air for resistance. Fingers flex, toes shift beneath layers of fabric, gauging temperature before committing to movement. Feet find the floor reluctantly reacting to its cold, with a familiar practiced flinch that does not delay the process so much as acknowledge it. The sensation is sharp, but expected absorbed quickly as weight settles and balance is regained. Clothing is reached for immediately drawn on without ceremony or reflection. There is no pause for comfort or preference. Garments restore the layers that made rest possible, replacing what the blankets provided with something more durable. Fabric meets skin as insulation rather than decoration sealing in what warmth remains. The apartment does not permit nakedness for long, not through shame or rule, but through consequence. Exposure is uncomfortable here, and the body learns to respond without hesitation. It asks to be met with preparation, and each morning the body answers. As movement resumes, sound follows. Floorboards register weight again. A chair shifts. A door opens and closes. These noises feel louder after the night, not because they are new, but because the body has grown unused to producing them. The apartment responds in kind, translating each action into shared awareness. The day has begun, not through announcement, but through accumulation. Smell reasserts itself gradually. What lingered softly overnight becomes more defined as air stirs. The trace of last night's cooking, the mineral dampness of stone, the faint presence of bodies returning to motion, these elements reorganize themselves without disappearing. The apartment remembers what happened here. It does not clear its senses simply because time has passed. Water returns to attention early, almost as soon as the body has accepted wakefulness. Containers are checked with the quiet seriousness reserved for limited things. Lids are lifted, weight is tested by hand levels are assessed with the quick accuracy that comes from repetition. The first use of the day is deliberate, chosen not for comfort, but for consequence. Every pour carries an awareness of what will be needed later, of how quickly supply diminishes. Cold water shocks the hands fully awake, the sting immediate and clean, leaving no room for lingering sleepiness. Warm water, if it exists at all, is rationed with care, poured in smaller amounts, stretched across tasks guarded as a brief advantage rather than an expectation. Washing restores function more than comfort. It clears the skin, steadies the senses, and prepares the body to work. There is no indulgence in the act, no sense that the day has begun in ease. The water does not invite softness, it permits readiness. Heat, too, must be rebuilt, and it returns reluctantly. Fires are coaxed back to life only if fuel allows, and the decision to burn is never casual. A flame must be earned. The process is slow, requiring patience and observation rather than force. Kindling is arranged carefully. Air is guided toward the embers. The first signs of life in the fire are small and uncertain, a faint glow that could disappear if neglected. Smoke behaves unpredictably at the beginning, testing the room's willingness to accept it. It may cling low before rising. It may hesitate in the chimney. It may slip into the space as a reminder that warmth always comes with compromise. Eyes sting briefly, throats tighten, and the body continues anyway, because the alternative is worse. Only after time does warmth begin to gather unevenly and modestly collecting in certain areas while leaving others untouched. The apartment does not warm quickly. It does not reward impatience. It must be persuaded through steady attention that the effort will be sustained. As the day advances, routines re-establish themselves with the calm inevitability of well-worn paths. Tasks return to their places as though they had merely paused overnight. Objects are reached for without searching. Movements follow familiar routes through corridor and doorway bodies, aligning themselves with the apartment's expectations almost automatically. Light is chased room to room as before, work migrating with it briefly near a window, then retreating inward when glare shifts or cold returns. Nothing about this repetition feels redundant to those who live within it. It feels necessary, like breathing. The apartment is not interested in novelty. It does not reward innovation for its own sake. It values continuity, the steady reappearance of order, the reliable rhythm of effort, the quiet proof that life can be maintained again and again, even within the same limits. What becomes clear over time is that the apartment does not merely contain life. It shapes memory. Habits formed within these walls persist beyond them. Bodies carry forward the lessons learned here: how to conserve warmth, how to tolerate noise, how to accept partial rest, how to prioritize effort. These habits remain even when circumstances change because they have been embedded through repetition rather than instruction. Those who leave this apartment take it with them in subtle ways. They notice drafts others ignore. They measure light unconsciously. They adapt quickly to shared spaces and sleep lightly within them. Silence feels strange. Excess feels wasteful. Comfort, when it appears, is treated with caution rather than entitlement. The apartment has taught them how to endure. The space itself retains traces of those who have lived within it, not as objects or marks alone, but as patterns. Furniture remains positioned where it best captured light. Floors where movement was heaviest. Doors bear the memory of how they were used quickly, quietly, repeatedly. The apartment does not forget these interactions. It incorporates them. Even when occupants change, the rhythm persists. New bodies learn the same lessons often without realizing they are learning them. The cold instructs, the light limits, the sound connects, the water disciplines, sleep negotiates, cleanliness signals intention, space divides presence. These rules are not enforced. They are revealed. What the apartment ultimately teaches is not hardship, but adaptation. It does not demand suffering. It demands attention. Those who fail to notice its conditions struggle against it. Those who observe and adjust find a narrow path of balance. Life here is not comfortable, but it is possible, and possibility sustained over time becomes endurance. At the end of the day, after work has moved through the rooms again, after light has retreated, and sound has softened, the apartment returns to stillness. Not emptiness, but readiness. It holds what has occurred without judgment. It prepares to host the same negotiations again. In this way, the apartment is not a backdrop. It is a participant. It does not speak, but it teaches. It does not change easily, but it adapts, slowly shaped by the lives it contains. It remembers those lives not individually, but collectively, preserving their patterns long after their names are forgotten. And when night returns, as it always does, the apartment closes in, gently offering no promises beyond familiarity. Sleep will come again, imperfect and sufficient. Morning will follow. The cycle will continue. What remains in the end is not the apartment as a place, but as a discipline, a way of living shaped by limits, a form of quiet knowledge passed from body to body through shared space. Within these walls, life did not unfold easily, but it unfolded steadily. And that more than comfort or design is what the apartment remembers. Leaving the apartment is never abrupt. It does not release its occupants cleanly or all at once. Instead, departure happens in stages, just as arrival once did. The body does not cross the threshold and forget. It carries the apartment with it, folded into posture, habit, expectation. Even when the door closes, behind the space continues to exert its quiet influence. The final moments inside are marked by small, practical gestures. Objects are returned to their places, not out of sentiment, but because order reduces uncertainty. Containers are checked one last time. Windows are adjusted to the angle that best balances air and cold. Curtains are set to their familiar positions. Nothing dramatic occurs. The apartment does not ask for ceremony. It asks for readiness. Crossing the threshold requires a brief recalibration. The door is heavy, its movement deliberate. When it closes, the sound is final, but not emphatic. The interior quiet does not vanish instantly. It lingers, clinging to the body as it steps into the shared spaces beyond, corridors, stairwells, streets. The outside world does not rush in to replace it. Instead, there is a moment of overlap where the discipline of the apartment and the unpredictability of the city coexist. Staircases feel different after living inside. Steps seem wider or narrower than expected. Sound behaves less predictably. Air moves more freely, carrying smells that are sharper, less layered. The body notices these changes immediately, even if the mind does not name them. Shoulders adjust. Pace alters. Attention spreads outward rather than inward. Yet the habits formed inside persist. Movements remain economical. Awareness remains tuned to surfaces, to drafts, to sound. On the street, the contrast is most pronounced. Space opens suddenly, offering distance and noise without structure. Light arrives from multiple angles. Sound overlaps without hierarchy. The body responds cautiously, not overwhelmed, but alert. Those who have lived inside such apartments are not easily startled by the city, but they do not relax into it either. They carry an internal sense of limit, an instinctive understanding that resources, warmth, water, attention are not infinite, even when the environment suggests abundance. Over time, the apartment's lessons reveal themselves in subtle ways. Sleep remains light even elsewhere, responsive to sound and change. Silence feels unfamiliar. Excess light feels intrusive. The body prefers corners, walls, spaces that provide orientation rather than openness. Comfort, when offered freely, is accepted with skepticism. There is an ingrained sense that ease must be maintained, not assumed. Relationships are shaped as well. Those accustomed to shared walls and shared sound develop a tolerance for proximity. They are skilled at coexisting without constant interaction, at recognizing presence without demanding attention. Privacy is understood as partial rather than absolute. Boundaries are managed through tone timing and restraint rather than isolation. These skills travel with the body, applied instinctively in new spaces. Work, too, is approached differently, shaped by habits formed in a space that never allowed effort to be wasted. Tasks are prioritized by necessity rather than preference, chosen for what must be done rather than what feels satisfying in the moment. There is little room for indulgence in impulse. Attention goes first to what keeps life moving, what preserves warmth, order, and function. Other tasks wait without resentment, understood as secondary rather than abandoned. Completion is valued over perfection, not because standards are low, but because conditions rarely support refinement. Finishing a task means it will not demand attention again immediately. It creates space, however brief, for rest or for the next obligation. Perfection, by contrast, offers diminishing returns in an environment where results fade quickly. The apartment teaches that effort must meet reality, not ideals. A floor swept well enough is better than one scrubbed endlessly while other needs go unmet. There is an acceptance of incompletion that does not feel like failure. Unfinished work is not a moral shortcoming. It is a consequence of limits clearly understood. The body learns to carry unfinished tasks forward without anxiety, to return to them when conditions allow rather than forcing completion at all costs. This attitude prevents exhaustion. It preserves continuity. Work becomes something that unfolds over time, not something that must be conquered in a single act. Effort is measured carefully distributed across days, rather than concentrated in bursts that cannot be sustained. The apartment discourages intensity, because intensity consumes resources too quickly. It teaches pacing instead. Steady application repeated often enough to matter, but rarely enough to recover. Muscles learn endurance rather than strain. Attention remains focused without burning out. Progress is slow, but it is reliable. Through this rhythm, work becomes less about achievement and more about maintenance. The goal is not transformation, but preservation. Life continues because effort is applied consistently, not heroically. The apartment has taught this lesson quietly, without praise or punishment. It has taught endurance, not intensity, an understanding that lasting work is done not by those who push hardest, but by those who keep going long after urgency has passed. Even memory is shaped by the space left behind. What is remembered most clearly is not discomfort, but rhythm. The sequence of mornings rebuilt through cold and water. The gradual retreat of light. The shared soundscape of night. These patterns persist, resurfacing unexpectedly when similar conditions arise. A draft in a new room triggers an old response. A narrow corridor evokes familiar movement. The body recognizes these cues before the mind does. The apartment itself continues without its former occupants. New bodies arrive. The same routines begin again. The cold teaches. The light limits. The walls transmit sound. The structure remains indifferent to individual stories, preserving only patterns of use. Furniture shifts slightly. Floors wear further. Doors continue to open and close. The space absorbs each life quietly, without distinction. There is no sense of loss in this continuity. The apartment does not mourn departures. It does not celebrate arrivals. Its role is not emotional, it is instructional. It offers the same conditions to everyone who enters, teaching the same lessons through constraint rather than guidance. Those lessons endure because they are practical. They do not rely on belief. They rely on repetition. For those who leave, the apartment becomes a reference point rather than a destination. It defines what is sufficient. It sets a baseline for what the body can endure and adapt to. Future spaces are measured against it consciously or not. Some feel generous. Others feel inadequate. None feel neutral. In time, the memory of the apartment softens. Details blur. Specific rooms fade. What remains is a sensibility, a way of moving through space, a way of resting, a way of sharing air and sound with others. This sensibility is durable because it was learned slowly under conditions that demanded attention rather than comfort. The act of leaving, then, is not an ending. It is a transition similar to the ones the apartment enforced daily, from light to dark, from warmth to cold, from noise to quiet. The body steps forward, carrying what it has learned, prepared not for ease, but for continuity. And perhaps this is the final lesson the apartment offers. Life does not need to be comfortable to be sustained. It needs to be understood. It needs limits that can be negotiated rather than ignored. It needs rhythms that can be followed even when conditions are imperfect. The apartment provided these things without explanation and without comment. It did not teach through words or warnings. It taught through distance, through resistance, through the steady repetition of consequence. Space itself became instruction. Narrow corridors taught economy of movement. Cold floors taught preparation. Limited light taught patience. Sound taught restraint. Nothing was framed as a lesson, and yet every day reinforced the same truths. Those who lived within these walls adapted not because they were unusually strong or disciplined, but because adaptation was the only way to remain. The apartment did not reward refusal. It responded only to adjustment. Over time, this adjustment settled into the body so deeply that it no longer felt like effort. What had once required attention became instinct. The hands reached for layers without thinking. The feet moved carefully in dim light. The voice lowered automatically in shared space. These responses were not choices anymore. They were habits formed by living within limits that could not be ignored. Strength had little to do with it. Survival here belonged to those who learned how to listen to space and respond quietly. When the door closes for the last time, nothing dramatic occurs. There is no sharp break, no sense of completion marked by sound or gesture. The world outside continues as it always has. The street does not pause. The building does not register the absence. The body does not announce its departure or demand acknowledgement. The moment passes with the same restraint that governed life inside. And yet something durable has been formed. Not pride, not nostalgia, but a quiet competence that does not need to be displayed. A tolerance for shared existence learned through walls that never fully sealed and nights that were never fully silent. A readiness for repetition, for days that resemble one another without becoming meaningless. The apartment remains behind, holding its patterns intact. It waits without expectation, prepared to teach the same lessons again to whoever enters next. Floors will continue to wear where people walk most often. Light will continue to favor certain corners. Sound will continue to travel. The space does not change easily because it does not need to. Its function is continuity, not adaptation. And those who leave carry its lessons forward, though rarely by name. They appear in how sleep comes lightly and adjusts quickly, in how movement remains economical, even in wider rooms, in how noise is tolerated, how proximity feels manageable, how comfort is appreciated but not demanded. These lessons are woven invisibly into daily life, shaping how the body occupies whatever space comes next. The apartment no longer surrounds them, but it remains present in posture, in habit, in endurance. Not as a memory of hardship, but as a quiet understanding of how to live within whatever limits remain. As the night deepens, the apartment begins to grow still. The sounds that once traveled through its walls, softened footsteps fade, and the small movements of the day slowly release their grip. There is no single moment when life inside this space truly ends. It simply slows until effort feels unnecessary and the rooms settle back into their familiar quiet. For most of the 19th century, people did not experience Paris as a vast open city. They experienced it through floors that held the cold walls that carried sound and habits learned by repetition rather than choice. Their world was measured in rooms, not streets. When sleep finally arrived, it was not always gentle, but it was familiar. It came the same way each night, shaped by the same constraints, the same shadows, the same expectations of the body. And in that familiarity, there was a kind of rest. If you are still awake right now, you do not need to make an effort to stay with these words. Let them blur, let them drift, and allow your attention to loosen. And if sleep has already begun to carry you somewhere else, that is exactly where you are meant to be. Before we part, you are invited only if you feel like it to leave a small sign that you were here tonight. Where are you listening from, and what time is it where you are right now? These quiet details matter more than conclusions. Stories like this were never meant to end sharply. They were meant to fade the way a room fades when the last light is lowered, and the world outside the door no longer asks anything of you. Thank you for spending this time inside the apartment. Wherever the night takes you next, may it be slow, gentle, and uninterrupted. Good night.